The book is The Battle for Christmas by Stephen Nissenbaum, published by Alfred A. Knopf. Professor Nissenbaum, what is the battle for Christmas that you refer to?
Well, I suspect there's always been a battle for Christmas just because the season and the day have meant so much to people that naturally different groups are going to want to make of it what they will. But the main battle for Christmas that I describe in this book is between the pre-19th century Christmas, the way most people celebrated it, which it seems was not religious, nor was it domestic. It was a rowdy street scene. It was a carnival. It was a site of drunken behavior, a very aggressive begging, and altogether the kind of scene that we would feel pretty uncomfortable with. It was a battle between that and a group of reformers who tried to bring it inside the house and succeeded and used Santa Claus to do that.
And when was the battle joined?
The battle was really joined in a big way in the years around 1820. This is one question that I can answer quite precisely because the Santa Claus that we know and the ritual around him that we're so familiar with was really created in a very deliberate fashion by a group of English-speaking, English-descended New Yorkers in the years right around 1820. These were New Yorkers who were rich, they were politically very conservative, and they were feeling threatened by the other side of this battle.
Well, you ought to talk a little bit more detail about just what Christmas was before this time, that people thought they had to change the way it was celebrated.
Well, it had always really been a time when the rules that governed ordinary behavior in early modern society, when those rules just could be broken with impunity. You can think of it as a time when rule turned into misrule, when the world got turned upside down, when anything went.
What kinds of things were permitted?
You name it, and it was probably done even if not permitted. The commonest kinds of things involved social inversions is the phrase. What that really means is that this was one occasion in the year when people without power, without money, the servants, the apprentices, the peasants, when people like that felt that it was perfectly okay for them to act as if they were the high and they were the mighty, and they had a right to, in fact, impose their own demands on the really rich.
And what did that mean in terms of bothering people?
It meant that they could go around to the houses of the wealthy and not just knock on doors, but pound on doors, and if that didn't work, pound on windows, and if that didn't work, and it sometimes didn't, break windows, and to demand treats. Treats would mean mostly alcohol, the new beer, the new wine, which was ready at this season, the best food, the food that the rich people would generally keep for their own family. They had on this occasion to share it with the poor because the poor were now the high and the mighty. You can think of it as a kind of trick or treat, really. You give me what we want, and then we'll wish you goodwill. You don't give me what we want, we'll do you damage. A little like Halloween, except along lines of class, not along lines of age.
And why was this happening at this time of year? And was it focused on just the United States, or was it around the world?
It was around the temperate climate world. It was around that part of the world in which the harvest season was completed by the beginning of December. The grain had been harvested, the new beer, the new wine had been made, the animals were slaughtered for meat, the meat was fresh. And this, of course, is a world of scarcity for most people, where most folks don't have anything good to eat at all for most of the year. If there's one time of year when they did, it was this time of year. And they also had the leisure in which they could consume all this stuff. And so you put together plenty of stuff to consume, the leisure to consume it, and a period where it was really all right to turn the rules of the social ballgame around, and you come up with a very combustible combination of forces, and indeed they combusted. So Christmas was a time of hellfire.
Was December 25th the day that Christ was born?
That there is no way of knowing. The Bible tells the story in great detail, the book of Luke, about shepherds abiding in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night, and so on. But nowhere in the Bible is there any indication as to what season of the year that event took place. And it wasn't until 400 years after the birth of Jesus that the church in Rome finally decided that they were going to settle on a date to celebrate the anniversary of Jesus' nativity, and they chose the date of December 25th. And the reason they chose it was really that they knew the church was extremely good at this kind of thing. The church knew that most people around the world were celebrating that time of year anyway. And so by setting the date of the Nativity on December 25th, they were able to make sure that it would be massively observed. The problem was that since it was already being massively observed by people who knew exactly what they wanted to do, it was very difficult for the church to actually get control of it. So in a strange kind of way, Christmas has always been, and not just in our own day, but always has been a holiday that's been exceedingly difficult to Christianize.
Well, then why, if it was a church-endorsed holiday, did the Puritans in Plymouth Colony, as you say in your book, actually ban the celebration of Christmas?
They banned it simply because they knew full well, first, that there was no indication that Jesus was actually born on that day. And they said, look, if God had wanted us to celebrate this event, surely he would have given us some kind of hint as to what date to celebrate it. And the fact that he didn't give us any hint suggests that we don't need to celebrate it. But they also knew very well that the way Christmas was really being celebrated in their own society in England was in fact through this very kind of misrule and social chaos and disorder, and that's really why they decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Better give it up than to try to reform it.
Well, let's jump ahead to Clement Clark Moore. Who was he, and why is he significant to your story?
Clement Clark Moore is best remembered today as the man who wrote his poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, which we all know as The Night Before Christmas. Moore was also, as it turns out, an extremely rich man. He had inherited the entire, what's now the entire Chelsea district of Lower Manhattan, which was the name of his estate. And he was a very conservative man who, like most of his friends, loathed the twin forces of capitalism and democracy, both of which were encroaching on his city. And in fact, his own estate between 18th and 24th Street in Manhattan was being divided up into numbered streets and avenues right before his eyes in the very years before he wrote The Night Before Christmas. So Clement Moore was a man who had very good reason to fear what was happening on the streets of New York, because the streets of New York were literally carving his own country estate into little bits and pieces and rendering his own house very vulnerable.
So how does writing a poem about Christmas help him?
Writing a poem about Christmas helps create a wonderful new ritual, a very creative new ritual that brings the entire Christmas celebration out from the streets and into the home. Before Moore wrote his poem, we could say, Christmas misrule took the form of the rich giving gifts to the poor, the high in status giving gifts to the low in status. What Moore did that was new was to take that exchange and to bring it inside the house and to limit it to the family itself in the secure confines of domestic space. What was traditional and represented continuity with the past is that when adults gave presents to children, it was a duplication in another form of the old ritual in which those high and mighty gave gifts to those low and powerless.
How much of the poem's description of Santa Claus, including the name, how much of that was new to people?
Actually, Moore does not name St. Nicholas as Santa Claus in the poem. The change from St. Nicholas to Santa Claus was really coming about at this time. Before Moore wrote his poem, rituals involving St. Nicholas were really rituals of judgment. St. Nicholas, the real St. Nicholas, had been a bishop, the representative of God on earth. And in St. Nicholas Christmas rituals, which were held incidentally on his name day, December 6th, not on Christmas, the good saint would give rewards in the form of gifts to good children, but to bad children he would leave whips, birch rods that their parents were supposed to beat them with. Clement Moore took the judgment and the punishment out. But what he left in an interesting kind of way, was a middle-of-the-night personage who breaks into a house uninvited. The old form of aggressive begging. But what Moore did in a really very brilliant stroke, was to transform this household invader, this nighttime housebreaker, into a man who makes no threats, makes no demands, and simply leaves presents instead of demanding presents. And so he's taken the remnants of the old ritual and transformed them into something absolutely non-threatening. So that's, I think, how a single poem was able to play in a very complex way an important role in transforming the most powerful annual ritual in Western culture.
We'll take another look at the picture of on the cover of your book, if you can tell us some more detail about what's significant about this drawing. First of all, what does this particular drawing mean?
Well, this drawing is the first from the first illustrated edition of Moore's poem, which was published in 1848. And if you look at it, you'll see that this is not the Santa Claus that we are familiar with, that this is a Santa Claus who looks more like a beggar than he does like a jolly old elf or a bishop. This is the kind of Santa Claus who, to an American of the 1820s, resembled the kinds of outdoor beggars who are roaming the streets. But again, this is a Santa Claus who has a smile on his face and presents in his sack. So what we have here is a visual piece of evidence that the Santa Claus ritual that Clement Moore helped to develop not only points forward into our own day, but has little vestiges of the old, threatening Christmas ritual.
We have a lot more to cover in a little bit of time. Talk about Charles Dickens and his story, A Christmas Carol, and the effect on the celebration of Christmas.
Dickens' novel was immensely popular right away, both in England and here. When Dickens came here, he had to read that book all the time. And it seems to me that one of the things that many Americans would have taken, and did take away from that book, was how to solve a new kind of Christmas problem. And the new kind of Christmas problem was, now that Christmas has been divided up into, it's been made into a domestic holiday, how do you take care of the various kinds of people that you know or know of? Well, Ebenezer Scrooge, after his conversion, goes to his nephew's house. So you spend the day with family. As far as his trusted employee, the employee Bob Cratchit, with whom he's on a first-name basis, an intimate basis, you send a Christmas present. It's essentially an employer sending a Christmas bonus to his trusted employees. And to the nameless, anonymous poor, Ebenezer Scrooge learned that it was perfectly okay to give to representatives of organized charity. So what Ebenezer Scrooge learned from A Christmas Carol, and what the readers of that book also learned, was how to make distinctions between the degree of personal involvement on the part of a respectable person and the different people to whom he might or might not owe Christmas debts.
In the days of Scrooge, was it all that unusual to keep the office open on Christmas Day?
It was not all that unusual, in fact. And in fact, in the 1840s and 1850s, shops were actually kept open on Christmas Day, not by Ebenezer Scrooges who were refusing to observe the holiday, but by merchants who were trying to cash in on it by allowing individuals to do last-minute Christmas shopping.
When did consumerism weigh in?
Consumerism weighed in at the very moment when domesticity weighed in. Let me explain quickly. The domestic Christmas involved making children feel good, not giving drinks to the poor, and certainly not getting your children drunk. What are you going to do to make your own children feel special? They already eat your best food the rest of the year. You have to find another way to do it. You go shopping. You give them luxury goods that they wouldn't expect the rest of the year round. So commercialism enters the holiday at the very moment that the holiday becomes tamed and domesticized. So if there's a striking lesson that I learned in doing this research for my book, The Battle for Christmas, it's that there never was a time when Christmas was an unsullied, pure, domestic, family values holiday. There was never a traditional non-commercial Christmas. The moment it became a family-oriented affair, it became a commercial affair. And people were complaining about the commercialization of Christmas, believe it or not, as early as the 1830s.
Well, you've talked about the development of Christmas almost beginning to today. Do you see a trend, or have we reached, as it were, the end of Christmas?
I am a historian, and we historians are notoriously bad at predicting the future. But I would say that the battle for Christmas is unending. It is waged today. We can see today an alliance between children and merchants to make the season last as long as it can, to put up the decorations earlier and earlier, to commercialize it as much as possible. And then on the other side, parents and people who want to use the holiday for devout purposes, who would like to put a stop to that. So it seems to me that the battle for Christmas goes on, and where it will end, it takes more than a historian to know.
Stephen Nissenbaum is the author of The Battle for Christmas, a social and cultural history of Christmas that shows how it was transformed from an unruly carnival season into the quintessential American family holiday. Professor Nissenbaum, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. You're welcome.
Washington Journal.